I think we'll get started then. Thank you all for coming in. Appreciate it. We are meeting with the candidates for a congressional representative from Washington's 3rd District. Would like to welcome the incumbent, Jamie Herrera Beutler, and challenger Michael Delavar and Bob Dingethal.
Dingethal, yeah.
Okay, want to make sure I get that correct. I think you met reporter Lauren Dake. I'd like to introduce her. Lauren will be sitting in. She will not be asking questions in this forum, but she might try to corner you afterwards. And we are videotaping this for use on our website. Just a heads up. I'm Greg Jane. I think I met all of you on the editorial page editor here. I'll be moderating the meeting, but the other members of the board will also be asking questions. So to start with, please keep answers fairly short, to the point, and hopefully things will go smoothly. We'll go around the table and just briefly, in 2 minutes or so, tell us why the people in this district should vote for you. And we will start with the incumbent, Jamie.
Well, I asked people for their vote to return to Washington, D.C. because I don't believe anybody's going to work harder for the people of Southwest Washington than I will. This is my home, and it's where I grew up. It's where I want to raise my daughter and hopefully grandkids. And I want to make sure that people can find jobs, that they can provide for their families, that the American dream is something that is still alive and well. And that's in a nutshell. There's a lot of specifics there. But that's my focus.
And we will get to specifics
I figured
later,
we would.
So.
So that's pretty much, that is why I'm asking for people's votes, because these are some of the best years of my life, and it's an honor to get to use them in service to my communities.
Thank you. Michael?
Right. The reason I'm running is because our district deserves representation that is going to follow the Constitution faithfully in all cases and to protect their individual rights to life, liberty, and property. And I believe that it's been clear that while I agree with some of Jamie's votes, there are many votes that I think definitely fall short of that standard. And the biggest issues really are defense of individual rights consistently, like take for instance the NDAA Act of 2012, etc. So having defense of property rights, individual rights, is most important, and that's the role of a congressman. And also being representative and being present and being with the people, public town hall events, and that's something that I'm making promises that if elected I'll be before the people, hearing their comments directly and explaining to them my understanding of the issues and hearing directly from them. So constituent services, public town hall meetings, and following the Constitution faithfully. That's why I'm running.
Thank you. And Bob? Good.
We're moving into a very different time, and a time of growth, most assuredly, and potentially prosperity. And that's a lot different from shepherding your district through a time of difficulty. The people who prepare most and take advantage of the opportunities and bring opportunities back from Washington, D.C., that bring the things that we do well to Washington, D.C. for the nation, are going to reap the greatest benefits of it. There's a lot of money in this country right now. We see the stock market as at an all-time high. There's trillions of dollars in uninvested cash in this country right now, and there's an opportunity for us to grow the middle class and create a sustainable economy in an area that could boom for decades if we do things right. So my plan is to help be a catalyst to that growth.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to some specific issues and just throw out topics. And start with Michael. Tens of thousands of children have illegally crossed the border in Texas. What should the federal government do about it?
The first thing that the federal government should do is follow the law, and that's where we need to have some of the debate, because as I understand it, and I don't have a full understanding of exactly which law is being referenced when I heard the reports, but minors of non-Mexicans are treated differently, I believe, than minors of Mexicans. And so following the law means working in partnership with state. I'm not sure exactly how they're doing it, but following either getting family members that they're attached to here in the United States, or else partnering with their host country or the original country. But the short version is, if we accept that Obama can use his pen to circumvent the law and say that our borders are open, then we are encouraging people to come here in waves, and that's inappropriate. So what we should do is say that America's policy for immigration is what's best for America, and that should mean that we should not encourage people to be coming over in waves like they are.
So can you elaborate a little
Sure.
more on that? You said that Mexican immigrants are not being treated.
My understanding is that non-Mexican minors are treated differently by our immigration policy than
How?
Mexican minors. Mexican minors, I believe, can be deported directly back to Mexico, is my understanding. But non-Mexican minors cannot be, I don't know if they cannot be, but they, as a policy, are not directly deported back to Mexico. However, as I said, that's from a report that I have heard, and I haven't seen the actual law itself. But that was, I believe, on NPR this morning. They were explaining that part.
Okay.
Bob, your take on that issue?
Yeah, it's actually the law is House Bill 7311, and it was signed into law by George Bush, and it was passed unanimously by Congress. And what the law states is that he's right, it does treat Mexican immigrants differently, and it's more of a refugee status for children who are brought to the border from Central American and South American countries. So by law, there's not much you can do right now unless you change the law. So the law right now says that we have to take care of these children.
But it doesn't say we have to keep them. They are, in fact, going to be sent back. They should be sent back. The issue is you don't just turn them around at the border and say, good luck, hope you make it back through the desert. And so that's the difference. It's actually not that it's legal for people to come here illegally,
No.
but you are accurate. It is that they are treated differently. And I think I don't know, I wasn't in Congress, but I'm guessing it has to do with the proximity of Mexico versus if you're coming from El Salvador or what have you.
See, Bob, does the Affordable Care Act need to be fixed, abolished, or left alone?
Well, fixed is kind of a misnomer, I think. Like any law, I mean, I think the Affordable Care Act, and I'm sure the Congressman can tell you exactly, is somewhere over 2,000 pages long. And it's a very, very ambitious bill. So whenever you do something like that, Social Security and Medicare are similar to that. You have to implement things, roll them out, analyze them, see what works, fix the things that don't work, buttress the things that do work, and make sure it evolves to meet the needs. Then there's no way you could create a law that's so broad-reaching and ambitious and have it do everything absolutely perfectly. That just doesn't work that way. So it's a great framework. Just the fact that people will not have to be discriminated against for health care from pre-existing condition alone makes it worthwhile. Great framework. If we work together, it'll become the best health care in the world.
Michael?
I believe it needs to be repealed, yes. Now, the repealing it is going to produce some challenges, of course, because people who have pre-existing conditions who then lose Obamacare would be left in limbo. If they had lost their previous health care insurance due to Obamacare going into effect, that produces a bit of a challenge in transitioning away from it. So any repealing of it, we would have to take that into account, and that would have to be some national debate that we would resolve. But I do believe that it does need to be repealed.
But you would favor provisions protecting those with pre-existing conditions?
I think the principle involved here is Congress did harm to society by putting a system in place that forced millions of Americans to lose their health care insurance. And then if you say, okay, well, do over, let's just repeal that law, now these people, by having known pre-existing conditions, would be prevented from getting the insurance that Obamacare canceled for them. So it produces a bit of a moral dilemma, and Congress would be, in part, responsible for providing some sort of framework for a solution for that.
Jane?
I do think it needs to be repealed, and I still believe it needs to be replaced. When you talk about state high-risk pools, I actually think, or I should say we should talk about state high-risk pools. I think there are 70,000 people nationwide that fit into that chronic care, most expensive, insurance drops them type of category. I don't think we needed to break the entire system to get at fixing it for those folks. In fact, Washington State is a model leader in high-risk pools. And I think that's something we can and should have encouraged, and should in a replacement for the nation in each state. Because right now the insurance companies pay a premium that goes into a pool, and if you are a medically complex person, and I know something about this, you get kicked into that category, and you have access to care. So we didn't need to shift a majority of people who are on private coverage into a state system. Right now they're being funneled. They're being told in Washington State, you should try for Medicaid. Well, Medicaid, I just introduced a bill. I'm passionate about this one. If you're a kid on Medicaid and you need to see a specialist in a different area, you don't get to see that specialist because it's a roadblock. And so to push people off of private insurance into a Medicaid system where they're basically limiting care, to me, it's not worth it. We can and should do better. And this is an area where I think Republicans have blown it. And I am pushing us not to blow it again. I think when Republicans didn't push out purchase of health insurance across state lines, when they didn't push high-risk pools in every state, when they didn't do small business health plans, there's several different things that they didn't do. It set the stage for the Democrats to come in and say, well, here's our solution. And I think we're all paying the price for it. In Clark County, speaking of, there's about 50% of the seniors who have chosen Medicare Advantage. That's a huge uptick. In fact, I think it's the highest. It's about 50% in the state. So they're now no longer going to be having the option of having Medicare Advantage in Clark County as a result of this bill. And try and find a physician on Medicare if you're a new patient. So we have I actually think it did a lot more harm than good. I'm pushing my colleagues, I've pushed my leadership to put a plan out there. I know there's a big debate. I've been told, well, we shouldn't do it because then we'll get hit politically for all the problems in our bills. And it's true. But I think we need to do it because we missed the boat before, and I think if we don't put together a reasonable alternative now, and I'm happy to talk about those, but I want to monopolize time.
And
I think we need to do it.
A reasonable alternative, and I don't remember a time actually before the Affordable Care Act, which, by the way, I'm signed up for and have a very good program, so do my children. All I remember is spiraling healthcare costs, being denied certain procedures, inability to negotiate drug prices, wasn't going anywhere, the Republicans weren't changing it. Somebody had to take a risk. I think it's a very courageous thing to do. Somebody had to put a stake in the ground, and zero Republicans voted for the Affordable Care Act and didn't put in a counter proposal.
Why haven't Republicans had a counter proposal?
I think, what I said was I think there are some, I've had some conversations with some of the leaders in the Senate, they don't want to take the political risk. And I think it's wrong. I think that's why we lost at the beginning, because I think we actually have solutions that would work. You're talking about your kids having access to health care. Do you know there are plans in this state as a result of the Affordable Care Act? Those kids can't access Seattle Children's. I mean, how is that fair? It's not fair at all, in my mind. There are several plans. We had to fight just to make sure that there was a plan in Clark County, one plan, that would give your kids access to Seattle Children's. It wasn't like that before. Now, it was not good before. I believe Americans deserve access to health care, period. And I think Republicans didn't put in the free market solutions that I believe would have driven down costs and allowed people to choose their doctor. Instead of what we're doing now, I mean, look at the VA. It's such a good example of when the government is the payer, the provider, the accountability measure, all wrapped into one. And we're going that way with our private health system. So I think we should arrest it. I would support health insurance across state lines. I would support high-risk pools. I would support small business health plans. I'm pushing a bill for Medicaid kids to get them access to 21st century care, even if it's not the state that they're in. And that, by the way, will bring down costs in Medicaid. So if we can get that model going, we can apply that to Medicare. So I agree with your premise. Republicans did not move the ball on health care before Obamacare came. But that doesn't mean that two wrongs make a right. And I think you can ask anybody right now, do they feel better off? And I've had probably one person to several hundred that come to me and say, I am worse off. I have lost my plan. I've lost my doctor, and I'm paying more.
And I've had the opposite experience. Many people come to me and say, I have health care now. I couldn't get it before. I have it now. I'm starting my own business. Now I can get health care. Before, if I couldn't leave my company because I couldn't get health care. So I've had very good experiences.
Michael, along those lines, should Republicans come up with an alternative, or?
There are many things that we can be doing. The biggest problem that we have here is, well, I think part of the reason why the Republicans didn't come up with an alternative in the first place is because many of us assert it's unconstitutional for Congress to impose a solution like this. So if the answer is, well, do we have this unconstitutional law or this unconstitutional law, if you take that oath of office to support the Constitution exactly and appropriately, it means you don't replace a bad system with maybe some bureaucrat's vision of a better system, but simply recognize that the states have the final authority over certain things. And that would be an example. Now, admittedly, the healthcare system had problems prior to Obamacare being passed, and that provided a lot of good talking points for people saying this is why we need to fix this with this big gargantuan law. Any big gargantuan law is going to have things that sell it and things that are demerits. But do we want Congress to be deciding everybody's healthcare policy? I would say no. When we talk about free market mechanisms, though, there are some really great market mechanisms out there. One example is if you take a look at the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, they do some pretty amazing things within the current system, or I should say they are currently in operation and doing great business. A couple of key points. They put their prices online. Now, do we want to mandate that everybody puts their prices online? No. But it's a free market mechanism that when the prices are online and people are price sensitive, and also sensitive to the quality of the product, they evaluate things and they say, well, a coworker of mine said that he spent 4.5 hours recovering in a hospital room and was billed $16,000 for that 4.5 hours. Now, with the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, you know the prices, you agree to the prices, you agree, just like when you're fixing a car, you get an estimate, you agree to it, you sign it, and you say, go do the work, with contingency as understandable, of course. So knowing the price beforehand is a huge advantage. And that's just one little thing. And one thing that prevents that potentially for happening is something at the state level called a Certificate of Need Board. It's not a federal issue, it's a state issue, and the state should be aware of that potential need for change. So yes, there are changes that need to be happening, but what Congress can do and should do, at the very least constitutionally, is allow people to buy insurance across state lines. The Interstate Commerce Clause, I believe, carries that, or should say, should allow for that very easily. Other than that, Congress should be working to undo a lot of the damage that they've done over the years.
Jamie, the community, I think, thought that we had some of the controversial Air Museum issue behind us, and then popped up Commissioner David Medore with a proposal to sort of, I guess, bring the issue back to life again. What's your view on Commissioner Medore's proposal for the county to take over the Air Museum, and where are we at there?
Well, and I haven't had a formal conversation with the trust, but in informal conversations with members, I haven't heard that I haven't heard a green light. So I'm not going to push, I didn't push the city. I wasn't going to push an entity to take control over something if they didn't want it. But I'm going to need to hear from not just the commissioners, but also folks in the community and from the trust that they're going to want to go that route.
So do you have some reaction when you heard of, did Medore contact you specifically?
I think he sat down with my district director. I think what he's doing, his goal, is what this community wants. I mean, the Air Museum is a big deal to us. It was probably one of the hottest issues outside of the CRC that I have heard in my 3 years from just a very diverse population. It wasn't one group or one, ideological line. So I think he's pushing for a solution is the right thing. But I'm going to need to hear from the community that they want this solution, and I think the jury's still out. I'm not opposed. I don't know if it's super likely.
Does that mean it's unlikely?
I don't think it's super likely, though.
Oh, okay. I was just looking for a definition.
Can I jump in on this one?
Sure.
I agree. The Pearson Air Museum is a jewel for, I took my kids and my nieces and nephews. It's a wonderful thing. Whenever people come to town here, I would point out the reserve and take them to the museum, and they just love this thing. It was not a particularly smart move. Don't do stupid stuff level of movement. But I think, does the county have enough money? It doesn't look that way right now. But we need to find a way to do this. And I was talking to some of the founders of the museum. They said, really, it's not very expensive. That they said most of the Most of the exhibits were free. Most of the maintenance was done by volunteers. So I think this is something we could come together as a community and find a way to get back in there, because it is a jewel, and I think we're a very giving community. So I think people would jump up and support it if we could get the political football aspect of it out of the way.
And this can be for everybody, but that suggests that the direction that it's going now is not a workable solution. Essentially saying that the federal government doesn't know what they're doing and they can't handle this museum. But is that really true?
No, certainly not. It doesn't mean they can't handle it, but the Forest Service, or the National Park Service, like every other government entity, the Forest Service and like that, is very underfunded and understaffed. So this is a great example of something where you could do a private-public partnership and get this to work. It would be a shame to lose it because we can't figure out a way to work it. If we just do things that are simple and pragmatic,
What do you
we'll get
mean
it
when
done.
you say lose it? We're not losing it.
Well,
Somebody else is running it.
from what I understand right now, it's just an empty shell. So,
But I'm assuming from what you understand as well, there are plans to not make it there.
yes, and I haven't seen anything to me that says that we're imminently going to have something of the same quality that we had with the Air Museum. But we can. I think the Park Service can run it efficiently, but I think we need other people to help make it happen. And whether it's the county, the city, or private individuals, or a combination of all three, which I think would be the best, if we could ever get them to come together. I was chair of the Parks and Recreation Advisory Committee, and I can tell you, working with the county and the city together is not an easy thing to do, but it can be done.
Do you have any view on that, this one?
Well, I agree. There's actually quite a bit of agreement. I can see that we have a local museum that has been a great attraction for many years, and it would be nice to keep it local. But one of the best things we could possibly do with this type of event or type of a venue is let the locals support it as best as they can. And what has made it great, and from what I understand, not knowing some of the particulars of it, but from what I understand, what's made it the best has been the local people volunteering, making it a great, welcoming location. So that will probably have its best success when there's local control over it.
And let me add to that. This is so. I think I got involved 2 years ago when I got a call saying, "Help! We can't permit things like a veterans event or a youth soccer event." And I think what was happening at the time was this was a public-private partnership that had been lauded. I mean, the trust was bringing in money to help run the museum, and at a time when federal budgets are nil. So it actually was not just something the community saw as awesome. From a government operating standpoint, this is what we want, is more of these types of partnerships. And I think it dissolved. And that's why I don't know. I mean, we've been through mediation. We have had everybody around the table. I have been in those meetings. Some of the most derogatory meetings I've had directed it at me. So I know how our locals are feeling when they're in these meetings trying to go to bat for this. I don't know that chapter is going to reopen. My hope is we move forward and we still have the facility, we still have the exhibits, that we can come to some sort of truce that allows the community to use what they want, and the trust is going to spend its time and its efforts in other areas, and they have every right to. Man, they went to bat. So.
Michael, after a recent radio interview with you, host Lars Larson said, "If you want to vote for a guy who believes the domestic abusers, nuts, and felons should be able to own guns, it's Michael Delavar." Is this accurate?
No.
What are your feelings on that?
On the particular vote?
On gun control.
On gun control?
And gun ownership.
The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed is, to me, fairly clear. And if you have to ask the government for permission to own guns, then the worst case scenario which our founding fathers recognized about why the gun ownership or arms was necessary for the people, was in the very worst case to defend themselves against their government. If the government itself is the one that gives you permission to own guns, it defeats the purpose of the Second Amendment in the first place.
So should felons be allowed to own guns?
It's currently illegal, and that's really not, well, you're asking a theoretical question about whether the law should change. In that case, I would say that the short answer is yes, and especially if we say that free men are free men. If you've paid your debt to society, then the answer is yes. However, am I going to be making that a big point on my campaign? No, of course not. I don't think there's any taste in the public eye for that level of freedom or changing the law. So I'm not going to be pushing for that. But in principle, I do support that. I think there are a lot of things on my plate far before this would ever come up. And the relevant point was the increased funding for the NICS system, which, according to the Gun Owners of America or the National Association of Gun Rights, diminishes on some level our right to keep and bear arms.
Cheney?
I guess I feel like we need to strike a constitutional balance. You cede your constitutional rights when you commit a felony. When you abuse someone, when you hurt a kid, you forfeit those rights. It's not the government taking them from you. And so, yeah, I absolutely believe...
Where does it say in the Constitution that you forfeit those rights?
Those are I didn't say the Constitution. I said that I believe that the current law of the land is if you are a felon, you're not allowed to own a gun. And I actually believe that's consistent with constitutional intent. When you're swearing your oath of citizenship, or when you're swearing your oath to take office, or a military oath, you're basically saying, I'm not going to take up arms against my government. We can talk about militias, we can talk about local folks and gun ownership. I believe and have supported Second Amendment, First Amendment, Third Amendment, Fourth Amendment, because I believe that we need to. But that doesn't mean if I harm someone, what I'm doing is I'm taking away their opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which is guaranteed in the Constitution. So we have to operate within a framework. These are my rights, but as long as I'm not taking your rights, I get to have them. And I think that the Second Amendment falls into that absolutely. I mean, the current operating system is if you're a felon, you go in, when you purchase a firearm, you're supposed to put your name on the counter, and they're supposed to run it through a background check. It's not prohibiting you. It actually, if you're not a felon, you'll get your firearm faster. Had we actually had money into this program, which was all this amendment did was put money into the program, Adam, the gentleman at Virginia Tech, I shouldn't say the gentleman, it's a habit, they're not all gentlemen, he wouldn't have been able to purchase his firearms. So I think good common sense says it is both constitutional and the right thing to do to make sure we keep guns out of the hands of people who have mental health issues, as declared by a judge. I mean, it's not a willy-nilly thing. I don't believe we should limit people unduly, but at the same time, it makes sense to keep the hands out.
It begs the question about whether or not, and I understand that when somebody is in prison, certainly they should not be having firearms. That's not in question. The question is, if they have served their sentence and if they are a free man, have they paid their debt to society? That would be the ultimate question of where Lars and I were going down that rabbit hole. Not that was, once again, something that I'm pushing for.
Then what about domestic abusers? They might be free. Should they have access to firearms?
Yeah.
Right. And I completely understand that as well. So when we say felons, when we say sexual abusers, when we say domestic violence offenders, those categories, when we start labeling people with broad strokes, it also includes people who are, in common sense terms, like, well, you say felon, well, releasing balloons on a beach, is that really a felony? Well, in this case, my understanding is...
But wait, what about domestic abusers?
Right.
They might be free. Should they be allowed to have firearms?
Once again, yes. The challenge, though, is that these laws don't prevent bad people from doing bad things. They don't. And bad people will find ways to get firearms. So yes, while there might be one person out there who is well known and does some bad things with guns, the mere fact that somebody wishes to do harm to other people cannot be overcome by a law.
So we shouldn't have any laws about protecting people? Like, it's not okay to go into someone's house and beat them because, well, can't prevent everybody from doing it.
I'm just saying that. No, of course not.
You got to apply the same logic. That's part of being a representative, is you don't get to just listen to an association or a group that scores you on something. You have to look and put it in context at your entire region and say, how am I going to keep my constituents, my conscience, and my constitution foremost in my mind?
Right.
You don't get to just cherry pick issues. You have to apply that same logic across the board.
Right.
Bob, thoughts on gun control, gun ownership?
Yeah, the amount of gun violence in this country is a national disgrace. You know, we get, when I was with Senator Cantwell's office, whenever there was like Virginia Tech issue, the first call I'd get is somebody going, if you think you're going to take my gun away because of this, you got another thing coming. The reality is that we have, people hunt, you know, if you want a gun at home for protection, that's reasonable. But we have various laws on everything. You can drive a car, but you can't do just whatever you want with the car. And your license, they know where your home is, that sort of thing. If you're fishing, you can't use nets, explosive, treble hooks, whatever the case may be. So reasonable gun laws need to be enacted. And people, you know, will throw out there, well, it's not, you know, guns don't kill people, people kill people, or bullets kill people, I guess. But the reality of it is we need to get over this and start to address it as a problem and start saying we can't even look at this because it's a you know, constitutional issue. We need to look hard at this and we need to make a difference. Other countries have done it. We can do it. We're smart. We've got to quit making NRA determine what we do for the safety of kids in schools. But there have been thousands of gun deaths since Sandy Hook. They're shooting, people say, well, you know, if everybody had a gun and we armed them and trained them, then these things wouldn't happen. Really? Well, it happens on military bases where you have people with guns and training. People talk about giving every teacher a gun. That's nuts. The last thing you want is, you know, a teacher who is not comfortable with a gun, having to carry a gun, and one student flips, first thing you do is grab the teacher and pull the gun out. So, you know, these are extreme things in my mind. You want a gun to hunt? Great. You want a gun to protect in your home? Fine. You're not going to get machine guns, bazookas, uranium-depleted bullets, things that put the police at a disadvantage. So we need to really start working on reasonable gun laws and change the culture in this country because it's way too much. It's really, really sad.
Let me ask a quick yes or no question on this gun issue. So all you get, yes or no. And I'll start with Jamie. If you were starting a utopian society,
No, Lou.
and you had the ability to frame that utopian society any way you could, would there be guns in that utopian society? And this is just one answer, yes or no.
Well, if I had...
No,
I'm not going to accept your premise, because if it's a utopian
Well,
society,
no,
why would you
hold
need guns to defend yourself?
hold it. You have
I have
the
to accept
premise.
your premise.
This is not real. This
Are we
is
dealing
a
with
utopian
humans?
Society. There's
I suppose we
not
could
real.
be talking about marshmallows and puffballs and rabbits, so...
So in this utopian society, would you have guns in a utopian society? All guns and no guns. So this would be either, you know, you could set this up so nobody would have a gun.
What was the movie about the utopian society? Where the people came up and they ate the people who didn't do anything?
You're giving these guys too much time to think
I
about
can't
their
really
answer.
give a yes or no. That's...
Talking about the time machine and the Morlocks?
Yes,
Yeah.
the Morlocks.
Eloy.
So that was the utopian
Yeah.
society.
So
And then
give-
at some
so-
point they had to
so
defend
what's the
themselves.
answer? You're the king or the queen. What is it?
Well, I put those domestic abusers and pedophiles
Yeah, okay,
on a
yeah,
cliff,
yeah.
and then
Right.
that's how I handle that.
Guns. You know, sometimes you got to deal with tough issues. This is it. Somebody just gave you the power.
I don't think we're going to have a utopian society,
Well, I
so
know
I
that.
believe that people need to be able to defend
Okay, so
themselves.
that's you would have guns.
Yes.
No.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, about military bases and people having training and whatnot, I think it was under Clinton that there was a change in policy where on military bases, all guns have to be unloaded. And they do not have, so yes, you've got a lot of military trained people who can actually use weapons and you know how to use them well, but they're not allowed to be armed on military bases unless you're part of the MP, I believe.
Sounds like utopian society.
Speaking of utopian, are we done with town halls as a Congress in terms of being able to engage the public directly in a kind of a forum?
I'll take that.
Yeah.
I've done over 34 community town halls. I've done 4 of the giant ones. I've done 15 town halls.
Open to the public?
All open to the public. Yeah, it's illegal to say this person can come and this person can't. I have changed the way I do it. I mean, I've done issue-specific town halls. I've done jobs fairs. I've done congressional hearings. And I feel like I have found the most efficient, effective way to hear from folks. But you know what? Sometimes people can't make it to a coffee or don't get on the telephone town hall or they don't get their question asked. And that's part of why I also do one-on-one meetings. I think for me, people are going to do them differently. I've seen everybody do just about everything. I feel like I've found the best way to hear from what the various different folks in this district
that
want.
change is that what your peers are doing as well in Washington?
I do think I have seen a lot of people change it up. It just depends. It depends on the area, quite honestly. Some people who've been there for a long time do the same thing at the same time every year. I don't know that I've had 2 years that look alike yet. So
I suspect I know the answer to this from Bob, but all 3 of you will have a chance to answer this. What's going on with the Tea Party, and are you liking it?
I'm drawing a blank on that one. I think in our district, in our region, I still hear people on a daily basis say, "Can you get the government out of our backyard? Can you help me by staying away from me so I can start my business? Can you get out of my health care?" So I still think that idea is alive and well. And these are people who probably wouldn't say I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, but the ideas behind the Tea Party, at least in this district, are still going strong.
Okay, so it's going strong and you like it. In this district.
Yeah, Tea Party is an interesting term because what's the definition? And you ask 10 people, you get 10 different answers. Generally speaking, tax enough already, government's too big, get them out of our lives. Yeah, that's what I'm hearing consistently across the district. And fidelity to the Constitution is a very, very strong theme within the Tea Party. Do I like that? Oh yeah, that's singing my tune. I have found incredible activists, low-key grassroots activists all over the district who align themselves with the Tea Party. And I'm asked frequently, are you a Tea Party member? And usually I go down the whole business of trying not to pigeonhole myself into somebody's specific vision of what the Tea Party is. But yeah, I would say that we're natural allies.
Yeah, I think the Tea Party is extreme, of course, but I would defend their right to be extreme to the death. And I think there's certainly people on the left that are equally as extreme. They just don't have a catchy acronym for a name, and they don't have a cohesive group. So it's sort of always been there. I think it's probably causing more more problems for the Republicans than it is for the Democrats right now, because it's kind of drawing to the extreme edge, particularly in primaries. But this sort of thing has always happened. I mean, we had Ross Perot and George Wallace and the Green Party and that sort of thing. So I think it's sort of politics as usual.
Jamie, you talk about cutting wasteful spending and reducing the deficit. Can we cut $17 trillion in wasteful spending?
If we do it overnight, no, we can't.
Do we need to raise taxes?
I don't think we need to. But I do believe if we don't act soon, we're going to lose the window of time.
Well, so if
I'd say we have around a 10-year period to change the trajectory. Otherwise, we hit almost an exponential up growth. And no, then we won't have an option. We'll have to raise taxes.
But if there's wasteful spending out there to be cut, why haven't we done it yet?
It's two different things. We have. In the 3 years since I've been in Congress, the stuff that we've been allowed to touch, the discretionary spending, we've reduced dollar for dollar, not just reduced the rate of growth, we've brought down to previous year's levels every year. And that's part of the reasons I joined the Appropriations Committee, is because we've done that. We need a willing partner in the Senate if we really want to get out what's driving the debt. And that is, it's our trust fund programs. We're not going to be able to keep our promises to our veterans if it breaks, or to the low income in Medicaid, or to, because I do believe in safety nets, or to folks who've paid into Medicare their whole life. So that's why I say we've got, and that every year that window goes down a year. So we don't have an infinite amount of time if we're going to do this, which is why I've supported some very controversial ideas with regard to bringing our budget under control. Everything from a balanced budget to the Ryan budget, because I think we need to.
Michael, do we need to raise taxes?
No, there definitely are a lot of moving parts associated with this. Just as Jamie identified, yes, there's a day of reckoning that is coming, and it's coming fairly soon. So, yes, there are many places where we can cut and have successful
Such
budgets.
as?
One place that would be, I think we should cut first, would be foreign aid. Also, Department of Education should be a state issue, so that would be a good example of where we could cut that at the federal level.
How much of the federal budget goes to foreign aid?
Not much, but it does a couple of things. One, it would probably improve our international relations. Two, it would send the signal that we are actually cutting, and that we're going to be spending our money here domestically instead of sending it abroad. Which, when you send a signal like that, even if it's symbolic, it is an important part of the discussion. That's another reason why the Department of Education has been so often amongst many candidates place to go, even though it's not that huge a part of the budget. It's not that I don't want schools to be funded. That's not it at all. It's more like the federal government has no authority over that, and that's one area where the states, if you want to keep the funding levels at the same level, let the states increase taxes to take up that gap that would be left. So the funding doesn't have to change. The amount of taxes doesn't have to change, but the mechanism of going through the federal government does change. And at the same time, you get rid of Common Core and No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top and so on and so forth. So those would be some small examples. As for the long-term programs, yeah, they need to be addressed. And one of the best ways we can somewhat, if you will, cover the shortfall for phasing out different programs would be to bring our troops home.
Bob, should taxes be raised?
If you look at it like a business, every business has a balance sheet. You look at both sides of it. You look at expenses, you look at income. The best way to get to a positive result is to do both. If you look at Reagan Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1982, raised taxes about 1% of GDP. During the Clinton administration, we had a surplus, and they kept taxes at a reasonable level. I don't recall anybody going into a panic mode because their wealth was so destroyed. So it's something that probably should be done. But every time you raise taxes, you need to sell the value of that tax to the people who are going to be taxed. You can't just throw a tax out there because you think it's going to be helpful. You really need to make people understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then commit to accountability for the result from that tax. But there are also a lot of places that we can cut funding. That's why you need to do both. We have 250,000 government contractors right now. Clearly something we could cut some money out of the budget there. We have, if we could bring the military back to the pre-Iraq war size, that would be helpful. The nuclear weapons budget is gigantic. How many times do we need to destroy the world over? So I think we need to look at the nuclear weapons, the nuclear weapons budget, nuclear weapons development, and that's something we can cut back. Return state taxes to Clinton-era levels. There's a lot of things we could do, but I think it's a balance of taxation and spending cuts. I think that's the only thing you're going to do in a reasonable time frame.
Well, let me ask a bit of a follow-up question. particularly to this defense budget issue. The statistics that I see, and I mean I have this exactly right, is we spend more money on our military than like the next 10 countries combined.
Yeah.
It may not be that many countries, but I mean, you look at number 2, 3, 4, 5, we got them all beat combined. And you just wonder whether or not all of the money we are spending on the military. So I'm not talking about this nuance, and I call it nuance, this nuance stuff that we're doing today. But it feels to me like two things. We're spending way too much money on the military. And for some reason, we have decided that we forevermore will be the world's cops. Whenever there is an issue going out there, Middle East, Europe, we're the ones that have to deal with it. We are the ones that have to bear the expense, that have to lose the lives of our soldiers, no matter where it is. So it's a sort of a two-pronged question. Can we make drastic cuts in the defense budget, and do we have to continue to be the world's cops?
Let me add, because this is one area where I do believe that auditing the Pentagon, I think you mentioned contractors. I think that's, if you talk to a private in the military, they will tell you they watch the waste. They know how that money gets spent. If you don't spend it all this year, never mind that you need to spend it, you won't get your budget in a possible increase next year. So they will spend the money. And I think that's one area where we need a full-blown audit. I have supported cutting the Pentagon spending. It's one area where I've taken issue with my party is with this whole sequestration. They really wanted to hold the Pentagon, and I'm not going to add this on to troops or to veterans, but they really wanted to hold it harmless. And I see it differently because I don't think we're the world's police. But I will also say, when you're comparing our spending to the next nation, I do believe in peace through strength. I mean, it's so funny because I go to D.C. and I'm like, I'm such a dove in my party. But I come home and I think, well, no, I think you've seen what happens when we completely pull out. Look at what's happening in the nations of the world right now. Some of the worst places are totally boiling over. And part of it is because this administration has chosen not to be a world leader when it comes to peace through strength. We don't say what we mean and mean what we say. Our allies don't know where we are. They're asking us. Our enemies know we're not going to respond. So you've seen Putin, you've seen Syria, you gas their own people, you look what's happening in Iraq. So I'm not saying we can democratize the Middle East. I don't believe that. And I'm all for getting to reducing the Pentagon budget. But I also think we are not protected by our ocean borders any longer. And I think we need to be cognizant of that. There is a balance that needs to be struck. You know, we've cut foreign aid over 20%, and I'm for that. I do think we need to build here, not over
where
there.
are our allies? Why?
Our few remaining allies. I'll
wait a second. Have we or have we not enabled our allies to say, "Don't worry about it. The U.S. will take care of it"?
Look. I'm not defending George Bush's doctrine of preemption, but I think Obama's doctrine of appeasement is the opposite end of the pendulum, and we're going to pay the price for it. Our allies, you talk about Israel, it's only democracy in the Middle East, really in a really tough neighborhood. I should say they're not the only one, but I think Taiwan, I mean, there's a few that are trembling in fear right now because we've promised things to leaders, and when push comes to shove, we back off. Ukraine's a great example. So, and nobody trusts that we're going to say what we mean and mean what we say, and I think we're going to pay for that at home. I'm worried about terrorists hitting us at home.
Why should we be in Ukraine? Where's Germany? Where's England? Where's Italy?
Well, we're kind of pulling out of Ukraine. We're kind of pulling out of Syria.
Understand
We're
that.
out of. We're not touching Iraq. We're out of Afghanistan. I'm not saying that we need to change all of them to believe what we believe. But if we don't think that that Russia is amassing land and resources, and that Russia wants to come after us on our soil, on our shores, then we're not paying attention. Same with Iran. I mean, you have to. And China's going to eat our lunch above the sack. They're gobbling up resources, and we're not paying attention to the alliances that are being built. So as much as we want to say, oh, we shouldn't have anything to do with it. I'm with you. I get to meet with these Gold
Now,
Star
nobody said
moms.
we shouldn't have anything
You're
to
right.
do
You're
with
right. That's an exaggeration. You're right.
Right. What I said was
You're right.
we should quit enabling our allies so that they take up and play a more major
I
role.
do think. I mean, look at Britain. Where Britain has been, and Australia, and some of our allies. We've left them hanging.
Oh, they've left us hanging.
When-
World Cup, should we be the World Cup?
No.
And are we spending way too much money on a defense budget?
Yes, we do not
Wait,
need to
wait.
be at the World Cup. Yes,
Okay.
so yes, we
No,
do not.
yes.
No, we do not need to be the World Cup. Yes, we are spending too much money on that part of the defense budget, and honestly, looking at how much we spend on a defense budget is not the same as disregarding, the commitment that our troops have. It's not saying that we should just give up and never have a defense. And certainly, with the changes in warfare, yes, we do need to be cognizant that oceans are not the same barrier they used to be. At the same time, when Obama sent our troops to Libya, Jamie voted not to
Send them.
saying the other way around. There was a vote to.
I haven't voted for the time certain withdrawals on troops in Afghanistan.
Right.
That's what you're thinking.
Well, no, not that. No. Hang on a second. I'll get the reference I'm talking about exactly. There was a vote that Congress had to approve or disapprove of the invasion.
We didn't vote to send troops to Libya.
No.
He did it without us.
Yes, and there was a vote on whether Congress should approve or disapprove of
Give
that.
me what that is, because I'm not really sure what you're talking about.
That
'Cause
would
I'm pretty
be.
sure I've not voted to send troops to Libya.
Well, it'd be a
didn't support the
negative. It'd be a
administration.
negative vote of not telling Obama to bring our troops back. Roll call 412.
We'll
Six.
follow up with you on that.
Yeah, 6/3/11 is the date. Yes, and the time certain withdrawals. I mean, when are we going to take our troops out of Afghanistan or Iraq if we don't actually set a time and make it happen? I mean, who is our enemy there? We don't have a declaration of war. We haven't had one since World War II, and that's a problem. So, yes, that is a problem. And no, we do not need to be the world's Cup.
We shouldn't be the World Cup, but I've been watching the World Cup too. World Cup. But I think more often than not, we're there defending our interests, not because we really believe in all this nonsense about we need to bring democracy to everyone in the world. If you look at where we spend our money, more than half the money has something to do with the U.S. interest. More often than not, that's oil. So, I've seen projections as high as 70% of all of our military budget going to protect extraction, distribution, and transportation of oil. So I don't know if that's true or not, but I have seen those numbers before from reliable sources. Can we cut our budget? Yeah, we really need to. We absolutely have to cut that budget. I don't know if you saw 60 Minutes a few weeks ago, the latest jet fighter out there is wildly over budget and yet very problematic, yet they're still looking at buying 2,000 a year every year for the next 15 years. I mean, those don't seem like sensible choices to me. When do you look at this and say, you know what, we don't need that much. We really, we can make smarter choices. And like you said, we have as big of a budget as the next 10 industrialized nations in the world. And we also, you're right, we don't get our allies. I mean, Britain will show up with a few, Canada will show up with some people, but we are far and away we put in the most. Every coalition, I mean, the coalition of the willing during Bush's Iraq war was a joke. That made no sense.
All show.
But it made us feel better because we're there on the side of right and might. So, when you want to save money in the VA, stop having wars.
I don't disagree with the points that you both have made, but I guess Bush has been out of office for 7 years, right?
Yeah, and we're still suffering for it.
So you really think that what's happening in Syria or with Russia,
How
you
long
really
did Bush
think all
blame
of those?
Clinton for everything?
Look,
It
my
happens
point
it happens
you're
on both
asking
sides.
voters to send you to Congress today to operate in the current situation. So do you believe that this appeasement, this lack of keeping any promises or saying what we care about at all internationally helps us or hurts us? I understand that you
I
don't want
don't
to
buy
protect...
the appeasement thing. I don't buy that at all. And also, if you read your history, you realize a lot of what we're dealing with, the seeds of that were sown in the early 1900s. You've got to learn your history. You fight it for a long time. 7 years is nothing. Nothing, especially in terms of world order. So we have to pay attention to that. We have to fight those issues. We have to remember it, lest we go forward with it, with not
What does that
understanding
mean for
why we're
today,
there.
though?
It means a lot.
We just hope that nobody attacks us?
Well, in the case of like Iraq,
No, this is
recognizing-
important.
Yeah,
because
well,
we're gonna.
the
Have you ever
seeds of
talked to
that
a
being-
Gold Star mom?
Yes,
So you know
Many.
that they put their heart and soul into this.
you bet they do, and they don't want
So
their
what
kids
do you
going to get
say?
killed. So let's try and avoid that.
I am with you. I am with you. I think what I want to understand is, I believe part of how we get there, how we avoid that, is we mean what we say what we mean.
So
and it
should
means
we
that
have
we keep our
invaded
promises.
Russia?
Oh my gosh. No.
So
Absolutely
what should
not.
we have done in the Ukraine?
I think
You
here's,
say
here's
we-
a good example. And I voted for a bill to help us open up our natural gas pipeline. Do you support the XL Keystone? Because if we open that up, we can be a net exporter of energy to Ukraine. They're not going to be dependent on Russia. Neither are some of those other European nations who are going to say, well, you're a big, mean, bully neighbor, and we have to get our energy from you. We're going to open up through economic levers.
Yeah, that's
Freedom.
great, but it still doesn't address what you said about the Crimea, where we didn't do anything. What should we have done?
Congress took action. We have said, okay, we don't want boots on the ground. We're not trying to start another war. I think we've learned some important lessons.
Yeah, this doesn't seem to connect for me. You're saying we should stand up, we shouldn't be appeasers, but we shouldn't actually put boots on the ground. So
Do you think that all military action has to be boots
Certainly
on the
not.
ground?
And
So I
hopefully
guess,
not.
again, what I'm trying to understand is...
There's a big difference
if you
between
wanted-
military
Well,
action.
I think we're
Go.
going to move on here. I'm
Sorry.
sorry.
But speaking of energy, even though this is not in your wheelhouse, I'll go around real quick. Do you support the proposed oil terminal down here at the port?
No.
Yes.
Well,
It's
I
a
don't
yes
know
or
if
no
either of you
question.
guys have noticed, but we actually don't get to permit that.
Well, I said it was out of your wheelhouse. I'm just looking for your opinion.
I honestly don't think that that's a yes or no question.
Well, but it is. I mean,
No,
yeah, I mean, if
do
you,
I support? Do I want crude oil coming by my house? Well, no. Do I think
well, but at
that
the end of the day,
they're going to permit it?
at the end of the day,
Probably not.
Well, yeah, but at the end of the day, I mean, if you were a citizen living in this area,
This is what I'd expect
You
my
are.
federal representative to do something about it.
well, yeah, but I'm
Right.
asking you as a human being, do you support it or don't you support
Oh
it?
my goodness.
I hate these questions.
I
don't you?
do,
Well,
because
but
it's not black and
these,
white.
These two gentlemen have answered the question.
Well, yeah, because I don't think
Oh.
there's a concern on the. I think there's an environmental factor here. I think there's not a lot of understanding about the people who put money into the waterfront here. So
yes or no?
I'm not going to say yes or no because I've never even looked at it like that.
Well,
I've looked at it and thought, what's my role? Safety. And in the last 3 years, I've helped increase money and standards for safety because whether it comes or not, it's still in my district. It still goes right through the gorge. So I help put money into rail crossings,
but you know,
tank cars.
but you know, sometimes you got to just make. You
Yeah,
gotta have
and
tough
if I
answers.
was running for governor, I would give you a yes or no.
No, he wouldn't even give me a yes or no. But that's a different story.
Yeah, I guess a follow-up question: would you accept money from Tesoro Savage if you're against it?
Well, have you accepted more money from the waterfront developers?
Have I?
Yeah. Well, I've actually been supported by people from both. So, gosh, who does that mean I'm for?
I guess
Exactly.
The question was, would
I'm
you
for the
use
people in
you have?
Southwest Washington, and it's not a black and white issue.
I know, but eventually,
I'm going to be governor?
you might be.
No.
No. All right. Well, let me mark that off. No governor. Senator?
No.
Yes. No. Vice president?
Blue. That's
Not me, no,
nuts.
you.
That's nuts.
Oh, that's nuts. Okay. I got this nuts.
All right.
We go. I think one more topic I wanted. You guys can jump in. Michael, you're a strong advocate for state rights and individual state rights and states making their own decisions. But shouldn't I in Washington be worried if Idaho decides it wants to start spewing stuff into the ozone? Shouldn't I be worried if California has lousy educational standards, which are going to affect everybody?
Environmental concerns definitely spill over state boundaries, and that's I think that's where the federal courts do have a right of settling disputes between states and parties between states. When it comes to education, no, that's that shouldn't be something. I mean,
But aren't
No.
my kids going to have to compete with kids from all over the country eventually when they grow up?
yeah, which is a good reason why you want your education system in your state to be as good as it can possibly be, because that gives you incentive to make sure that your state legislators are doing what they can, or the local school boards are doing what they can to make sure you have good education system here.
Bob, state rights?
I think there's certainly a balance in the way the Constitution was written allows for that balance. But I think as a representative, particularly, you have responsibilities in both. You represent your district not only in Washington D.C., but I think you represent your district throughout the state. And transportation dollars are a good example of that. People who came out of their districts and went to Olympia and fought for transportation dollars got them. And I think it's a reasonable thing to do to get. Things like I'm a big believer that if we free up more capital, we'll get more entrepreneurialism and we'll build the economy. So somebody like Jamie, who really has great connections in the whole district, I think can go to somebody and help that facilitate some of that growth as a representative. So, I think we need to be careful about having federal government supersede states' rights, but the country there are things that are crossover.
Jamie, states' rights?
Oh, we need to support them. There are things that are crossover. We have a great example right here. We have a river that separates the two of us. How we use the river, what it looks like, what commerce has done isn't just one state or the other. So there is a need for federal oversight. But I do think we've gotten way out of control. I think
As far as federal
as
oversight.
far as federal intervention into everything, you're more likely, I think it's 400 times more likely to come into contravention with a federal rule than you are an actual law. Which is ridiculous to me. It's a great example for our region, I think, has been really the timber resource policy that's taken place. One of my signature pieces of legislation that I wrote with a Democrat from Oregon had very bipartisan support, pushes to make sure that there are no more rules from the federal government about how we use Gifford-Pinchot roads. It may work in Virginia and it may work in Michigan, but we're a unique area with unique needs, and the federal government has no business shutting down economic impact because a group of people on the East Coast think, well, we don't have any open space, we'll turn you into a big park. So I think we've gotten way out of control. And I would say, which really surprised me, a significant part of my time in Congress as a representative is trying to go to bat for people against federal agencies. And that shocked me. I knew it would be a piece, but it's across the board. It's healthcare, it's physicians, it's small business owners, it's people in energy, it's people in high tech. I mean, it's across the board. Every time, it's cities and municipalities, it's ports. I spend a lot of time trying to get the federal rule writers to understand that one size doesn't fit all, and that's why we need to protect. I think that's why states' rights was such a big thing, is we know best how to run our lives, our schools, our economies versus a small group in DC.
Any other?
Real quick, Bob, have you run for office before?
No,
No?
I worked for Senator Cantwell as her
Oh.
outreach director for
Okay.
3.5 years.
Michael?
In 2008, I ran for Congress before I was redistricted against Baird.
Okay.
Yeah, and then also I was on city council in Washington for a couple of years.
Yes.
Wrap up?
Yeah.
No, I mean.
Oh, no. We'll just go through again. Thank you for coming. We'll go around once more. If there's anything else we didn't touch upon that we should have, let us know, and just give us your final statement. Sell us. Start
Yeah,
with
just
Bob.
real quick, I think we really didn't touch on education enough. We have a lot of problems here. Somebody drops out of school in the United States every 26 seconds. We're looking to get unemployment under 5%. We have a national 20% dropout rate. The average classroom in the state has something like 27 students in it. If we really want to compete on a world level, we have to address that. And when I talk to teachers and they say, what can we do? What can I do if I'm fortunate enough to be elected and go to DC? And poverty. We get 50% or more of the students in this state that are getting free or assisted lunches every day. So we need to make sure that we handle poverty issues, that schools have a reasonable range of control. If you're in business, 15, any business school will tell you, 15 is a reasonable span of control for any manager. Yet the average teacher has almost twice that, but the average school administrator is back to that 14 or 15 level right there. So we really need to step up. I think the McCleary issue is clear. We've made real errors here, and this is something we can handle. The correlations are clear. The more education you get, the more likely you are to be a good citizen, the less likely you are to be incarcerated, and it just goes up the line. So education is number one
Quick
priority.
philosophical question. You mentioned free and reduced lunches.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something government should be involved in? Why should government provide that for people?
I think because it's a residual benefit. First of all, you would have the schools would deteriorate if you didn't have it, and if there's food scarcity at lunch, there's probably food scarcity at home. So if you're hungry, you're not going to learn. If you're not going to learn, you're going to fail in the school system. Teachers are going to have to pay more attention to the kids who are hungry and not learning, and they're going to skimp the kids that are, able to learn more. So I think it would be a mess if we didn't do it.
Michael, final thoughts?
I wanted to emphasize something that you mentioned earlier, and that is about town hall events. Have they changed? I don't think so. Humans are still humans, and we interact differently in person than we do over the phone, and it means a different thing when somebody is standing in front of you. If elected, I'll be holding frequent and public town hall meetings to hear directly from the people, and to give them plenty of advance notice about the meetings as well, so that they can have a chance to respond back. The main reasons why I'm running are Jamie's vote for the NDAA Act of 2012, which allowed the president to accuse somebody and therefore have indefinite detention of that person, basically based on an accusation of being associated with terrorists. That's a horrific power to give any one man. And then on top of that, you've got all the other issues which are listed on my website, whether it's debt limit increase, UN dues, support for Libyan war, CISPA, NICS, EPA votes. All of these different votes, to me, they indicate that our representative needs to be more consistent in following the limits imposed by the Constitution.
And Jamie?
Well, I think my opponent made it very clear that I'm not an extremist. I do believe in making sure that the people in this district, my constituents or my bosses, have their representative working on issues that are important to them. And it's really, we haven't talked a lot about it, we talked ancillarily, if that's a word, jobs. That was why I ran. And I mentioned that a lot of my time is spent on regulatory issues. Every time I do it, it's to help us grow jobs, create an environment where jobs can grow, whether it's to make sure our tax system is reliable, it's not going up and down every year, so people can plan to pay whatever taxes they're supposed to pay. Energy costs, how we just passed a bill in the House that will hopefully allow us to produce more energy and maybe help with the gas prices we're seeing go through the roof. Because small businesses are the ones that really pay. I think it's 2.5 times more when gas prices go up than a large corporation does. And I think we are small businesses in this area. We're not heavy military. We're not heavy government. That's why we're the canary in the coal mine. So energy, that's part of the reason I want to replace Obamacare, is because small businesses are, I think, bearing a very disproportionate share of keeping up with that rule, or the many rules that are coming out from that. Access to capital. I mean, I've had some success with some legislation, but I really feel like some of the best success we've had has been when we thought outside the box. We've held actually it's been an annual jobs fair. We've had anywhere from 1,800 people to 1,000 people come, and we've been able to connect them with work. So that was the main reason I run. That's part of why I believe we need to bring the deficit and the debt down, is because I think that's going to kill jobs. But making sure people can provide for their families here continues to be one of my top line focuses, and that's why I want to run again.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.